Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare. So I've actually been on vacation for the last few weeks, which has given me a lot of time to really process Aquaman. And after watching and rewatching it, I have to say I still have a lot of mixed feelings. But what was really surprising was that in that time, the movie went on to be a pretty massive hit. Not just overseas either, it's performed surprisingly well domestically. Now, to be sure, box office isn't an indication of quality, but it does show that this movie has managed to connect with mass audiences in a way that the DCEU's previous films, even apparently Wonder Woman, did not. So I wanted to devote this video into digging into why. What about Aquaman, flaws and all, has hit with audiences in a way that few solo superhero movies from even more well-known characters have managed?
Swift and powerful monarch of the oceans, with ability to summon and command all creatures of the deep.
Any discussion about Aquaman's success obviously has to start with two people, director James Wan and Arthur Curry himself, Jason Mamoa. People seem a little split on the look of this movie, with a lot of people finding it breathtaking and others thinking it's a little tacky. I think I might fall somewhere in between. Aquaman is at its very best when it's in motion. Some sequences, like the dive into the trench, which showing this little clip from really can't do full justice to, are pretty stunning. James Wan is, first and foremost, a highly visual filmmaker. Just look at his filmography. His first breakout, the low-budget phenomenon Saw, was a movie built on dynamic camera movements and finding inventive ways to shoot a warehouse. A setting that could have been really dull in another director's hands, as most of the Saw sequels show. Wan isn't really a filmmaker that cares that much about realism or sometimes even naturalistic acting. He's a showman, and in my opinion, he's one of Hollywood's best. For better and for worse, that's on full display in Aquaman. A lot of the dialogue is purely expositional, and it makes the first act really choppy for me, as the sheer amount of info dumps threatens to almost completely overwhelm the movie. Then there's the attempts at humor. Now, I wouldn't say these all fall flat, and this is a cast that actually has a lot of charisma to spare, but there's a couple moments where it felt like it was almost a placeholder joke that was so lazy and generic that it should have been swapped out with like a real joke at some point. Specifically like the swamp butt joke. That kind of felt like the screenwriters trying to lean into Marvel style quips and then falling flat on their face. But what Wan does excel at, spectacle and big sweeping moments, he really hits out of the park here. They're obviously very different movies, but in a weird way, Aquaman almost reminds me of Tim Burton's original Batman, in that the best and most memorable thing about it is the amazing production design and sense of place that it establishes. Wan's Undersea Kingdom may not be an achievement on the same level as Burton's Gotham, but I don't actually think it's too far off either. Immediately establishing a massive city that I was dying to see more of. But both movies have similar drawbacks as well, in that the amazing imagery it presents is kind of in service of a script that hits all the expected beats, but never really does anything truly interesting.
You don't really think you're gonna get away from Aquaman, do you?
If he dares attack me...
The imagery and thoughtful design is expected to carry a lot of the movie, and for the most part, I think it's up to the challenge. I just wish someone had taken another pass at this script and tightened up that dialogue a little bit. Now, Jason Mamoa and Amber Heard probably aren't on their way to collecting Oscars or anything, but I actually thought they had a decent amount of chemistry here, at least compared to the absolutely awful underwater scenes in Justice League. Patrick Wilson is really hamming it up as King Orm, which, you know, feels right for a character named King Orm. But it was Black Manta who really stole the show for me. His costume may be a little on the Power Rangers side, but the actor really brought it, and the one big battle sequence set on land I actually thought was pretty great. The Italian setting, the romantic back and forth, and sudden ambush actually reminded me of like a 70s Bond movie, and I mostly even mean that in a good way. And like a solid Roger Moore Bond movie, there's not a ton going on under the surface of Aquaman, but at least that surface happens to be a lot of fun. Now, this is the part of the video that you guys might totally disagree with, but I think there's a useful comparison to be made between how this film handles action and how most MCU movies do. Not all, but a lot of Marvel movies are directed by people with backgrounds in mostly making small indie films. Think John Watts and James Gunn. And even those who don't, like Joss Whedon or the Russo brothers, often come from the world of very dialogue-driven television. Now, this has a huge advantage, as these filmmakers can help bring a naturalistic and human touch to the performances that are often lacking in comic book movies. But it comes with a trade-off too, as a lot of the actual visuals of the film aren't really the main focus and tend to be done in Marvel's usual house style. That is to say, shot on a lot of backlots and warehouses in Atlanta, and often with kind of a dull color palette. Now, this isn't always the case, especially recently, but I do think it's a big part of why so many people found Aquaman appealing. Visually, it's really bold, bright, and very unapologetically over the top, in a way that Marvel usually isn't. And I think that's the key to Aquaman's success. It doesn't excel at everything, but it managed to stand out from the crowd with a sense of visual style that really caught people's attention. I have to say, I wasn't really feeling this movie throughout its first 30 minutes or so, but by the time that big battle at the end rolled around, I was pretty invested. I think Jason Mamoa brings a really goofy ability to Arthur that he only occasionally got to show off in Justice League. Now, whether you like this movie, thought it was just fine, or really hate it, it's kind of hard not to be impressed by what they pulled off here. Fairly or unfairly, Aquaman has been the butt of jokes for a very long time. Peter David and a lot of other great comic book writers have pushed back at this for decades, and it looks like with this movie, they kind of finally won.
All right, now pull, suckerfish, pull! There, that does it.
Aquaman is far from a perfect film. I don't think I'd even place it in my top 3 superhero movies of 2018, but it was definitely a visually bold one, and it looks like for audiences around the world, that was enough. So I spent a lot of time on Twitter during my Christmas break, probably too much, and I noticed I kept getting the same question over and over. How do I become a YouTuber? Now, I'm hardly the biggest channel around, but personally, I'd say there isn't one set path that you can follow. But it is really great to know the basics of how shareable content on the internet works. And that's where the class Going Viral, Write, Film, and Make Content People Share comes in. It's a great class, and if you're making content or thinking about making content, but not quite sure how to get people watching, I would highly recommend it. And it's only on Skillshare. The first 500 people to click on the link in the pinned comment below will get 2 months of classes on pretty much any subject, from photography to art to business and way more, absolutely free. And look, I know New Year's resolutions are totally a dime a dozen, but you really can't go wrong with learning new skills. So if that really appeals to you, go to skl.sh/CaptainMidnight9 and get started.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes.